There we go. I don't know why it cut out. Welcome back to Wordy Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're going to be reading the final installment of The Edge of Running Water by William Sloane from the Rim of Morning short story. Well, the Rim of Morning collection, which is, I guess, a science fiction double feature of sorts. So I am on the clock. So I'm going to have to bang through this fairly quickly, which should be fine. Slightly shorter one this week. Let's see. So previously on, Mrs. Marcy died, and in the wake of her death, Dick, Anne, Julian Blair, and Mrs. Walters are interviewed by the town sheriff and also are interrogated at the town inquest about Mrs. Marcy's death. And they do not make friends there. The town is not thrilled. Suspicions and tension are mounting in and amongst our characters up at the the Talcott place, and this is made significantly more tense by Julian in the middle of the night working on whatever he's working on that's making that horrible noise. So we are pretty shortly going to find out what is causing that noise as the pressure from outside the house mounts. Chapter 25. Breakfast next morning was a strange meal. None of us had slept much, so that we all looked hollow-eyed as if we hated each other. Oh, let me reread that. Breakfast next morning was a strange meal. None of us had slept much, so that we all looked hollow-eyed and as if we hated each other. Certainly there was a coldness between Julian and Mrs. Walters, but it took no overt form because none of us said anything. I ate my food with determination and coaxed Anne to swallow a few mouthfuls of toast beside the coffee which we all gulped. When we were clearing up the dishes, Mrs. Walters announced that we would have to drive into town to buy food. She volunteered for the trip, but I think she was relieved when I vetoed that idea at once, and declared that Anne and I would go. I had no intention of risking the effect of Mrs. Walters' appearance in the streets of Barsham Harbor. It was odd how our spirits lifted when the two of us got past the Marcy house and onto the open road. The day was gloomy enough, with an overcast sky and a thin, cold wind that came down the river valley as though it were scouting the way for winter. But the car ran smoothly, we were warm in its cabin, and, most of all, the house on Setauket Point was behind us. "I was a dreadful baby last night," Anne said. "I'm glad you were," I answered. "Knowing that you needed support was the only thing that kept me from losing my own grip." The memory of that eternity in front of Julian's door made us both silent. Long before I was ready for it, Barsham Harbor was on our either hand. What? Long before I was ready for it, Barsham Harbor was on our either hand. Without discussion, we selected the A&P store that stood at the far end of River Street. It was out toward the edge of town, for one thing, and another, it was a chain store, and I felt that it would not be so likely to serve as a gathering place for people who might be talking about us. All the same, there were a good many people there when I went in with the grocery list. I wouldn't let Anne come in with me, and I'd made her promise to lock the doors of the car. She didn't argue about it. The moment I pulled open the screen door, I knew that this was not going to be pleasant. There had been a hum of voices before I entered, but in almost no time the store was heavy with silence. They were all looking at me, and they had all stopped buying, if that's what they had been doing. Clerks and customers alike, they stared at me. The mass silence and hostility of a group of unfamiliar people can be a terrible thing. I felt my skin crawl when I went to the counter. The clerk who waited on me was a pallid youth with adenoids. He took my list, looked at it, and began taking things off the shelves without a word. It was a big order, and by the time he'd finished collecting it, 2 cardboard cartons were pretty well full. I paid, and the clerk shoved the 2 boxes toward me without a word. I had a struggle to get them both into my arms, but I knew better than to ask him to carry one of them out to the car for me. As I went toward the door, a voice behind me said, "Some people can eat, I guess, no matter if there's blood on their hands." It was a woman's voice, harsh and bitter with prejudice. I paid no attention. Another voice, this time a man's, observed, "If I was them, I wouldn't be buying all that food. I'd take the first train." And a third added, "And they wouldn't be but a one-way ticket at that." The rest I could not distinguish clearly. There was only a hissing gaggle of voices at my back. As I was loading the boxes into the car, a man came out of the store after me. He was a heavy-faced fellow with huge shoulders and some kind of badge pinned to the inside of his coat. "Buddy," the man said. "Yes?" "Don't take that talk about leaving town too much to mind. Don't none of you go till Dan Hoskins gives the word." "And who are you?" "Pete Barnstable, deputy." He touched the badge. "Thank you," I told him. "And let me give you a word of advice while we're both on that track. Don't take sides. All we ask is justice." It sounded fatuous when I said it, but it made me hot with anger to find one man who should have been open-minded so obviously join the rest in hating us. He spat into the road just past my foot. "You'll get justice," he remarked briefly, and went back into the store. We drove home without talking. Chapter 26. Julian was waiting for me in the living room when we returned to the house. I looked at him with something close to dislike. Perhaps it was the aftermath of that 5 minutes in the store, but it occurred to me that I had had about enough of this house and the people in it. I wanted to leave it and them behind me forever. Anne I wanted to take with me when I went, but beyond that I did not care. I reminded myself that Julian was my friend, had given me the opportunity to go into my own chosen field of work, and that there were inescapable ties between us. But they meant nothing in my mind at that moment. "Hello, Julian," I said dully.
"Richard, I've been waiting for you to come back."
He hesitated, and then went on with a rush.
"To have that talk I promised you last night."
"Anything you want to tell me, Julian, I'll be glad to hear. But I don't know that I can help you. I don't know that you ought to go on with this notion of yours. It's absurd to believe it will work." He stood up, and the corners of his mouth twitched with something that might have been a smile.
"No," he said, "it's absurd, as you say. And yet, last night you were hammering at my door and shouting—"
"Oh, I'll give you that. But the damn noise gets on your nerves." I'll give you that, but the damn noise gets on your nerves. That was the most complete understatement I think I have ever made. He nodded vaguely.
I suppose it might, if you are not as familiar with it as I am. But come, my boy, we cannot talk here. I do not want anyone to overhear us. We can talk best in my room, I think.
I followed him up the stairs. He climbed them so slowly and with such difficulty that I had to wait on each step until he was above me once more. Watching that weak and uncertain ascent of his, I felt once more the pity and the desire to help him that had been so strong in me on the first morning of my visit. In all this confusion and tragedy, Julian had behaved with more poise than the rest of us, an undeviating control over himself which contrasted with my own behavior of the night before. But then he knew what it was all about. There was no reason for him to feel fear. Julian's room was a good deal like mine in its bleakness, though it was smaller. There was something monastic about the meticulously neat bareness of that cubicle where he slept. It must have been a servant's room when the house was first built, but the fact that it was immediately opposite the door of his workroom was obviously the reason for his selecting it. We sat on the edge of his narrow cot, and I filled and lit my pipe. Julian watched me with impatience.
"Richard," he began, "before I show you my work in the next room, I want to explain it to you in some detail. Otherwise, you will not be able to appraise the nature of the difficulty that confronts me."
"I wish you would," I told him. A sense of sudden excitement came over me. This was the opportunity for which I had been waiting, the chance that Anne and I had tried to plan for. If I was ever to be able to save Julian, it would be now, in the next few minutes. I shook the lethargy and resentment out of my mind and leaned forward to listen.
"You probably know," Julian began, "that a good many men have tried to do what I am engaged in at the moment. That is, create a mechanism for communication with those who are no longer alive."
"I didn't know that."
"Oh, yes. All kinds of machines have been built. Even Thomas Edison tried his hand at one, but of course he never completed it. He had not the background, for one thing. In any case, these machines have had one element in common. They have proceeded upon the principle of delicacy. The men who built them apparently believed that sensitivity of mechanism was the most important thing, so they used delicately balanced scales or needles, or they created, in a room where all other conditions were controlled, a diaphragmed pressure chamber, wired to reveal whether there was any sentient control able to alter pressures on either side of their instrument, and so on. Hundreds of such experiments must have been made. I surveyed them all years ago. All were failures. Inevitably, because they proceeded on the wrong basis. Radio itself, for example, would have failed as an important medium of communication had it been compelled to rely on nothing but the old-fashioned crystals. It was the vacuum tube, or valve, that opened the way. He stopped speaking for a moment, and I noticed he was kneading his fingers together as though this summary of his were causing him intense pain. Then he went on, his gaze fixed at the grey sky beyond the window. When I had finished my survey of the preceding work in the field, I was discouraged. I realized that I should have to begin at the very beginning, and I knew there might not be enough time in which to finish. So I did something that you will believe was weak and credulous, Richard. I went to séances.
He looked sidewise at me to see how I took this statement, and apparently reassured by my lack of surprise, he continued.
I can only compare that experience to Benjamin Franklin's in his investigation of electricity. He found it in the lightning, so to speak, but mostly there was nothing but darkness.
He smiled at that, slowly and with relish.
Not a bad joke, my boy. Mostly there was darkness. But once in a while there was a flash of revelation. I won't bore you with accounts of them. They convinced me, personally, that Helen was not gone, that she was still alive and waiting for me. It was in those days that I first met Esther Walters.
I knew that was the way it must have been, but I was not quite prepared for the sudden wave of sympathy that came up in me as I listened to Julian. Something about that desperate search for reassurance which had taken him so far afield, into places and groups of people that must have seemed fantastically unrelated to his academic life and his own rigid standards of work, made a lump come in my throat. He had always had courage. I had to remind myself that I was there to cure Julian, not to abet him in his obsession.
"Of all the people to whom I went," he continued, "she most clearly demonstrated the power to transcend the immediately physical world. I say immediate because, Richard, I am coming to believe that in the space-time continuum there is, perhaps, another world, and that what we call death is more like a removal from our world to that other one. I hope in a moment to give you some proof of that. Anyhow, I began to think about my problem in a new way. It was, essentially, a question of bridging a gap. I looked into many things before I satisfied myself that the gap could be bridged."
He looked at me gravely.
"I am talking to you as if you were still an undergraduate, Dick, but I want to be clear and untechnical, at least at the start."
"Quite right," I assured him. "You understand that I know nothing about this problem of yours. We psychologists leave it alone." The irony that I had intended missed its mark.
"Yes," he remarked, tolerant, "I know you do. You put rats in mazes. One of your fellow scientists," and the way he pronounced that word made me squirm, "once went so far as to put a crab in a maze. The miserable creature darted into one blind alley after another. Then, when it could not solve the maze and reach the food, it huddled in a corner and pulled off its own legs, one after the other. The crab was an experimental psychologist of the first water."
He gave me a dry smile.
"What I did next," he said finally, "was to attempt to discover how, or in what way, the occasional séance, the rare medium of Mrs. Walter's type, was able to bridge that gap, and why the process was so unreliable. My work on this point led me back into my own field of electrophysics. I came to the conclusion that the human nervous system is, in part, an electrophysical field, to put it crudely, and that the elaborate machinery of the séance was a rough and unreliable method of charging that field with a certain potential. In some way which I do not wholly understand, that potential is what bridges the gulf between ourselves and the others."
This was getting beyond me. It seemed the rankest form of wishful thinking on Julian's part, a hocus-pocus of hypotheses that no sane research man would bother with for a moment's time. But Julian was never wholly a sane man. His genius was too great for any such label. He was now, however, so fully launched into his explanation that I had no time for reflection.
"Of course," he pointed out, "I knew that my time, like that of every living man, was limited. In my case, only a few years remained to complete the work, so I was unable to make the exhaustive researches at every point in my progress which you and my own colleagues would no doubt regard as essential. I formed the conclusion that the uncertainty of the séance, or of the single medium, and the transitory manifestations of the true other world were due to the difficulty of building up this potential and the relative speed with which it was discharged. It occurred to me that I might reasonably expect to achieve far better results if I could create that potential independently of the séance room and even of a medium."
His eyes were now alive in his head. They no longer looked burnt out and heavy with weakness and fatigue. His voice was louder, more sure of itself. He stood up and began to pace up and down the room before me.
"So I studied the whole matter of the body's electrical fields. I measured them by certain criteria. I reduced my problem to a formula, and I began the construction of a machine which would make that formula a fact, which would build and maintain the potential of which I have spoken, not only at the level of the séance room or the mediumistic trance, but with infinitely greater power."
He paused in his striding, and for the first time his voice lost its assurance.
"Possibly I have employed too much power."
Is this machine of yours complete, Julian? He shook his head.
No, because it does not do all the work for which it was built. And yet I have put into it everything I know, everything I have been able to discover. There have been times when I was certain of success, but last night, and several times before as well, I have been genuinely distressed by the appearance of certain epiphenomena that I had not expected, and which I should like to show you for the benefit of your opinion. Of course, he said, more to himself than me, you will not be able to understand my invention, but you may be able to suggest something in connection with these epiphenomena. They worry me a good deal.
Is that noise one of them? He looked away from me swiftly, as if to hide something which I might read on his face.
You can judge that better in a few moments. All that I want to add now is that Mrs. Walters is at the end of her usefulness to me. She does not understand that fact. Of course, I am grateful to her. I shall see that she is rewarded for what she has contributed. He sighed. But that does not appear to satisfy her. She wants control over what we have worked out together. We have quarreled about this, and a day or two ago I discovered that, against my express instructions, she has been tampering with the machine itself.
He hesitated for a second, and I saw his tongue slide over his gray lips.
Tampering is not quite the right term. Experimenting with it. Naturally, in spite of all my warnings, and in spite of my telling her that we must proceed with great caution, she has no real understanding of the enormous energies, the terrific potential which the apparatus creates.
Something passed across his face as he spoke that elaborate sentence. It was a shadow, whether of sorrow or horror I could not quite determine.
I have forbidden her further entry to the room where the apparatus now is, across the hall, as you know. She believes that I am trying to exclude her from the final fruits of the research. She also is afraid that I mean what I said yesterday in that dismal Barsham Harbor courtroom about making my discovery public without commercializing it.
His face darkened.
Mrs. Walters is a paradoxical person. I think she is as genuinely eager to communicate as I am, but she wants also to make a business of it when we have succeeded. That, of course, is impossible. This is my last piece of work, Dick. I want it to mean the most to the whole world. It should be, must be, absolutely free to anyone who has need of the same kind of assurance that for which I have been hungry for these last years.
When he had his voice once more under control, he said, almost humbly,
Well, that's the story. I've told you because there is a chance that you will need to know it, and because, if you are to observe with intelligence what I want to show you, you will have to understand at least as much as I have told you. I know that you will never repeat it, even to Anne.
Of course not, Julian.
If you have any questions, save them until later. I want to give you a demonstration now, before we are interrupted.
I wondered how he expected us to be interrupted, but forbore putting the question. Instead, I followed him out of the room and across the hall. The steel door opened to his key, and I stepped behind him over the threshold. I heard the door click shut behind my back. And good morning to you. Well, it's not morning for you right now. Good day to you, Frank Misers / Milos Spult. Chapter 27. 3 people only had seen that room in which I found myself. Julian, Mrs. Walters, and Elora Marcy. I was the 4th. Whatever was in here, it would be strange. My heart was hammering at my ribs, and expectation had keyed my nerves high and tense. Julian's long speech had impressed me. It had left 1,000 unanswered queries behind it, but it had convinced me that I was to see something of a sort which no one had beheld before. My first sensation was one of disappointment. The 4 windows of the room were shuttered so tight that no light at all came into them except a gray crack or two that left the room almost black. Then there was a click and a sudden blaze of strong light. Julian had turned on a great reflecting lamp that was fastened to the ceiling. The very shock of electric light was a considerable one. The rest of the house, a century old, and the candles and lamps to which I had grown accustomed in the 2 days I had been in it, made the sudden flood of white light that struck my eyeballs seem unbelievable and out of place. I blinked and looked round me, and then, in one sudden instant, I knew why Julian had kept his apparatus covered when Mrs. Marcy came in to clean. The first sight of it nearly stopped the heart in my chest. The thing was right in the middle of the room, and there was almost nothing else in the place except a pair of wooden kitchen chairs and an old table littered with papers. The walls were bare and discolored with age, but I knew that, like in the living room below it, this had once been a noble room. There were windows along the east and south walls, and, in the sharp light of the ceiling reflector, I saw that they, too, were of steel like the door. The green paint on their inside surfaces glistened as if they had just been completed, and I guessed that they had not been open, in all probability, since the day they were installed. The apparatus itself was so much of a nightmare that my glance slid off it the first time without any precise attempt to understand what I saw. My impression was of seated figures, human and yet horribly not human, ranged around a black table with a sort of lectern at one end. On the second inspection I saw the thing more intelligently. There was, indeed, a table, its top made of ebonite, or some similar plastic, and rubbed to a polish, so that it caught the light from the ceiling in a sort of dark mirror, and gave it back to the eye in flashes of negative light. They were sitting around this table. There were 7 of them, one with its back toward me at the rear end of the table, and 3 along either side. The far end, where the lectern was, appeared to be empty. They were, I saw, all alike, all polished till the copper of their wires glowed, and they were holding hands. At least, their arms ended in 5 filaments of wire, and these were, in each case, linked with the fingers of the figures on either side. From head to foot they were made of wire, and there was something terrible in the fact that I could look clean through them. Ludicrously enough, though, their posture was that of seated figures. There were no chairs. Ludicrously enough, though their posture was that of seated figures, there were no chairs. Instead, they seemed to be fastened to the table itself, and supported by ebonite braces at regular intervals. I looked for one freezing instant at the tableau, and then, half hysterically, I began to laugh. Good God, Julian, I said. When you duplicate a séance, you duplicate it. This looks like a black mass in a futurist play. He smiled absently and went down the room. Yes, I suppose it is a bit startling at first. I suspect, too, that a good deal of this is unnecessary. But, as I told you, I had no time to experiment at every step of the way. Having discovered how to increase my bridging potential, I made my electronic fields from circuits as close to the ones which actually exist at a séance as I could. He went down the row of those fantastic figures, touching one after another. We have our silly moments, I suppose. Mrs. Walters and I, we've named them all. Have you really? I said in a faint voice. This is Hugo, Julian remarked. Mrs. Walters named him after a man that used to come to her séances. She told me once he used to try to pinch her in the dark. I've never known whether to believe her. He patted one of the figures on its insubstantial head. The others are various people, of course. I call the one at the end of the table Arthur. You know, after Arthur Wallace. He loves to preside at any kind of meeting. Or used to. He hasn't changed, I replied. It was difficult for me to speak at all. Surprise, the kind of aberrant impulse of humor that makes you want to laugh in church, and a deep alarm and revolted incomprehension made my throat thick. Was it possible that this gleaming travesty of wires and plastics was the source of that sound that had gone whispering through the old, shadowy house and terrified me the night before past all endurance? Had it created that torrent of noise that rolled over Anne and me in the rain-lashed meadow? Julian was matter-of-fact, of course. It was a familiar story to him, and in one unexpected way I felt no unfamiliarity myself. Julian's handiwork was always distinctively his own. Even here I recognized the style of his work, once the first shock of my surprise had worn off. The apparatus shone just as all his equipment had gleamed in the big laboratory back at the university. The absence of every comfort and convenience except the essentials was typical of him. And the curious blend of literalness and imagination that had made him one of the great creative minds of our time was evident in this last project, as in all the others. Only a literal mind would have been directly impelled to so tremendous a project in the first place. At the end, that same literalness had made him recreate this optical travesty of a séance in the second. "Come here, Dick," he said when I remained rooted by the door, staring at his handiwork minute after minute. "I know this is a curious experience, but I have brought you here not to look at my apparatus, but to show you what it does." He was standing at the upper end of the table, behind the thing that looked like a reading desk. I went toward him, walking wide around the table, and looked over his shoulder. It was not a lectern, but a control board. Its face slanted toward him, and the dials that sprinkled its slope were, I saw, lighted dimly from below. In the middle of the thing was a single large handle, which appeared designed to move in a slot in the face of the instrument itself. Below the table, I noticed, and across the floor, electric cables snaked to a number of outlets along the wall. "Lord," I told Julian, "but you've polished everything off neatly. It looks completely finished." He gave me a single abstracted glance. "Yes, I like things neat, but that is not the point either. We must hurry. I want you to have plenty of time to observe the phenomena of which I spoke. Are you ready?" I swallowed. "Yes," I answered. He pressed a button, and the ceiling light became dim. There remained plenty of light by which to see. I think I could well have read by the light which remained, and that is important in view of what I am about to describe. Julian was talking more to himself than to me, in a low, rapid voice. "I'm not sure whether light has an inhibiting effect. It does, of course, in a séance, but that may be a human psychological factor unconnected with the bridging potential. Generally, I reduce the amount of illumination, and I believe, too, that the power should be applied slowly." His hand came to rest on the control lever. The fingers gripped it until their joints were yellow-white. Nothing happened at first, and I began to breathe more comfortably. Then I was aware of a low hum, like that which an old-fashioned radio set makes when the tubes are warming. The skin at the base of my neck began to crawl, and I damned myself for a fool. This was all normal enough. Julian listened to the hum for a time, and then nodded his head and moved the lever again. The hum became deeper, but Julian paid no attention to it beyond a casual glance at the dials in front of him. Once more he moved the lever, and this time I was aware that he expected something to happen. He looked up from the panel in front of him and stared down the table. The 7 copper figures sat there immovably. I guessed that current was pulsing through them, but nothing was changed in their surrealist outward appearance. In what way I first became aware that an alteration was taking place in that room, I find it hard now to say. The noise of the tubes continued, deeper than before, but it was so low a hum that I could not believe it would be audible outside the room. It was definitely not the sound I had heard the night before. I think that the first thing I noticed consciously was the air around me. It was moving, not in any one direction, but in eddies and whirls, like water in a saucepan before it comes to a boil. I felt the twists and turns of draft touch my face and then my hands, and finally they were brushing against me from head to foot. Julian, I saw, paid no attention to this phenomenon, at least for a while. Then he turned to me.
"You feel that?"
he asked. "Of course. What is it?"
"Air,"
he answered, and then left the panel and went to the nearest window.
"We'd best open this somewhat," he remarked, and tugged up the sash.
Then he fumbled with the steel shutter behind it and swung it open. There must have been a wind on the river. At any rate, I saw his hair move and blow. After a while, it seemed to me that the air which was eddying in the room had settled to a single, steady direction. At any rate, I was aware of a draft against the back of my neck, but no more of the tendrils of motion which had brushed my face. Julian was again at the control panel, his eyes once more fixed on a spot which was apparently somewhere over the middle of the table, and above the heads of Hugo, Arthur, and their nightmare companions.
"What do you see?"
His voice was hoarse and low. I strained my eyes in the direction of his gaze. Nothing. But I heard something so faint that I could not certainly have identified it had I not been expecting it. The sound of the night before was in that room with us. In spite of being prepared for it, I was, once more, irrationally afraid.
"Now watch!"
Julian's voice was shaking. His hand moved the lever over to a point midway between the left and right ends of its slots with a motion so jerky that I knew the thing, whatever it was, that he wanted me to observe was going to happen. There was a sudden stir in the air at my back. I could feel it streaming past me now with renewed speed, and the humming roar of the machine deepened. As I stood there, following with my own eyes the direction of Julian's stare and listening to that unimaginable sound roll through the room around us, I began to understand that the noise did not come from the machine, nor was the hurrying river of air that passed us both being drawn into any part of Julian's apparatus. Something was happening in the sheer empty space above the center of the table. To this day I cannot be sure what the thing was that I saw happen there. It began as a point of blackness which I could see with great distinctness because it was between me and the far wall. Point of blackness is not a good description, and yet I hardly know what else to call it. There, against the grayish yellow of the room's faded wallpaper, was a thing. Suspended in the air, as it seemed to me at first. It was in no way human. It hung there, pulsing faintly and unevenly, but always growing with each expansion slightly more than it shrank with the contractions. When I first noticed it, the thing was the size of a large pea. I have called it black, and yet it was actually a colorlessness so intense, to define the thing in terms of its opposite, that it seemed to absorb the very glance with which I looked at it. I can remember nothing further of the way that thing appeared to me, or of the emotions I experienced watching it. My memory presents every detail of what followed, but not as a part of my own experience. As I stood there, my eyes fixed on that black focal point, I lost awareness of myself in an emotion so appalling and overwhelming that there is no accurate term for it. Fear it was not, for I was past the point of being afraid. I think perhaps the word awe comes closer to it than anything else. The blackness over the center of the black table grew. It expanded in the air with steadily increasing speed. The 7 figures never moved, never looked at it, were deaf to the sound that filled my ears and hammered at the walls of the room till it was wonderful that they did not shatter. As the thing grew, it became more clearly three-dimensional, although that description is in itself meaningless. We know, in actual experience, nothing which is not three-dimensional. Dimension is a fact with 3 attributes: length, breadth, and thickness, but they are triune and inseparable aspects of material existence. Not so this heart of darkness that beat in and out, to and fro, larger and smaller, over the center of the table. It had no dimension at all. It consumed dimension, negated it, developed like a parasite on the shape and frame of the familiar world. Julian was staring at it with the same fixed look. His hand still rested on the control lever, but the knuckles were no longer white with contraction. He was paying no attention to anything else but what was in front of us. The wind which was streaming through the window had risen till it shrieked like a gale, and his hair blew forward, thin and stringy, toward that center of nothingness in front of us. I saw him lean forward slowly, reluctantly, as if he were being pressed from behind. I saw my own hand, white and shaking, go down against the face of the control panel and stiffen into a brace, though I was not aware of moving it, nor even of the weight of driving air behind me that must have forced me into the action. The edges of the blackness were not precise. They wavered and changed like the outer rim of a whirlpool, and, as the thing got bigger, I noticed that it had a sort of penumbra, a rim of shadow through which I could make out the shapes of wall and floor and ceiling behind it. Let me say at once that there was nothing about this presence which suggested life, either present or past, to me. It was no more alive than a tornado or a maelstrom. It was simply an existence of forces so enormous that I could not grasp what they meant, or what was actually taking place. But I did see the inexorable spread of that thing, saw it numbly until it bulked as large as the table, and the room grew dim, because it was between us and the light on the ceiling. In its larger diameter it must have been several feet through. What? Oh, yes. In its larger dimension, it must have been several feet through at that moment. Dust, bits of stuff, the papers on Julian's desk were being snatched up by the wind and carried into that blackness in front of us. None of them came out again. I am sure that the very air which rushed into that chasm is gone forever. How long it took the thing to grow until it was almost at the edge of the lectern, I could not say. Several minutes, certainly. Some blind instinct of self-preservation moved in me then, though it was nothing conscious. But somehow I managed to get my left hand over Julian's and grip the handle of the control. With every ounce of power I had, I slammed it back to the starting point. Instantly, so sudden was the release of the pressure from behind, we both staggered backward, away from the table. The black gulf into which we had been staring vanished as though it were a light which had been turned off. The room sprang full into the glow of the lamp. Simultaneously, the air, meeting at the heart of the space where the thing had been, roared tumultuously in our ears. And then the room was still, silent, unchanged. We looked at each other without words. Both of us were panting. I felt spent, as if I had run for miles, and there was a thin ringing in my ears. Julian groped his way to the desk chair and sat down, trembling. He buried his face in his hands and did not look up for a long time. I stood staring down at him vacantly, my mind empty of anything except wonder that I was still alive and an incredulous surprise that nothing had altered. The thing had left no trace behind it. He looked up at me after a time and licked his lips. "You see," he said. "Yes." After a second long silence, he said, slowly, "I told you that I would show you the other world. Well?" With some difficulty, I remembered back to our talk in his room before this demonstration had begun. "Oh, yes. But, Julian," I could not think how to go on in any rational terms. "What?" "This thing you just showed me, that cannot be the other world you meant. That black thing was no world. It was opposite to any world at all. He shook his head.
"You're wrong about that, Richard. It is her world, Helen's. I know that. But I have not found the right door. Surely you see that this is at least the right track."
I did not answer that question. Instead, I demanded, "Why did all the air rush into that thing?" He looked away, and his voice was very low when he replied,
"I don't know."
And yet it seemed to me perhaps that he did. The same theory that was formulating itself in my own mind must have been in his, and long before now. But believing as he did that he had discovered the formula for the one thing he wanted, he would never believe that he had actually found something else. He would even reject the single hypothesis that could explain what we had just seen. In that moment of insight I felt pity for him, and yet I was more afraid of him than anything else.
"What am I to do?" he asked me, his face still averted. "I tell you, Dick, I do not see where I've gone astray on this thing. I've checked and rechecked my figures. I've tried one set of adjustments after another. You heard me doing that last night. And still, it is always the same. Sometimes it happens more quickly than others."
He put his hand on a black notebook in front of him.
"All the data are here. All my work for 6 years. It must be right."
"Let's get out of here," I told him. "I can't think in this place. I want to talk to you, Julian, but not now." He stood up stiffly and walked down the room. I followed him. The table gleamed as before. The 7 figures along its edges sat there on their non-existent chairs, their faceless heads turned toward the center, their copper fingers still in contact. I wondered then how Julian could have named them. Still, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos were named, and if men had found words for those... I can't remember how Lachesis is pronounced. Lachesis? Anyway, the 3 fates. Three of the fates. Where were we? Yes. Still, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos were named, and if men had found words for those 3 fatal sisters, it was permissible, I suppose, to christen the things around the table. Julian unlocked the door without a word, and we went through it. He was silent as we crossed the hall. In his room again, I made him lie down. "We won't talk just yet," I told him. "Stretch out a while and rest. I want to think. This afternoon is time enough." He looked up at me heavily.
"Perhaps. All right."
"I take back everything, Julian. I thought you—"
"I know," he said wearily. "Thank you, Richard. I feel easier now that you have seen that black node. We must work together on it, find out why it isn't what we want, and discover what we can about it."
The thought of creating that thing even once again made me deadly afraid. "I'll talk to you later about that, Julian. Promise me you'll rest a while now, and promise me that you won't go back into that room again alone. It isn't safe. If I hadn't moved that lever for you—"
"Yes," he said again. "I know."
He brushed his hand across his eyes.
"Thank you for that."
"One more thing, Julian," I said. "I want you to give me the key to that room."
"Why?"
He was instantly alert. "Because I don't trust you. I think you're planning to go right back there when I leave this room."
"I'll rest. I promise."
"Give me the key and I'll believe you. I promise not to go in myself or to let anyone else in. But to tell you the truth, Julian, I'm afraid of that thing of yours. Unless I know that you won't be going back in there, I won't be able to think clearly about this whole problem."
"You'll return it when I ask?"
"Yes," I said. I could not persuade myself that I intended to keep my word, but Julian must have decided to trust me. His secret had become, I think, too much even for him to carry alone. He took the key out of his pocket and handed it to me.
"Here."
I dropped it into my own pocket with a sense of triumph which I did not want to analyze too closely. Then I pulled a blanket up over him. "Get some rest now, for God's sake," I told him. "I'll call you in time for lunch. I may even lie down myself. I feel a bit rocky somehow."
"It's a relief to know that you understand about it now," he said. "I think I can rest to advantage, but we must have another talk this afternoon. There is something else I think I had best tell you."
"Sure," I answered, and left him lying there. His eyes were closed even before I got to the door. He looked old and weak. I went down the stairs heavily and quickly. I wanted time to think, to arrange the chaos of impressions in my mind into some coherence. The cold air outside felt good on my face. I walked up and down in the grass in front of the house and tried to reason things out. The more I thought about the apparatus of Julian's, the more sure I was that it was beyond my understanding. But other things began to fall into a sort of pattern. After a time, I went to look for Anne. And good morning to you, Optical Antenna. Thanks for tuning in. Chapter 28. I found her in the barn, washing the car with a sort of desperate concentration. I knew what was wrong, of course, but there had been no way I could warn her about the sound. When it began, she must have come out here to get away from it, and, in desperation, begun to clean the automobile. "It's all over," I said. She straightened suddenly and looked at me with panic in her eyes. Then she caught her breath and smiled. "Dick!" "All quiet along the Kennebec," I told her. "I've seen Julian's invention." She said quietly, "You look as if you'd seen a ghost." "No ghosts," I said, "but something. A nice little something." "As bad as that?" I sat down on the running board. "Worse." "I suppose you don't want to tell me?" "I can't," I said. "I promised him." She nodded. "All right, but what I don't know won't hurt me, and it's a relief to be sure that he hasn't succeeded." "Yes. Well, maybe I'm wrong in thinking I know what he's actually accomplished, but I don't think so, and I think he knows it too, only he won't admit it to himself, and it's got to be stopped. If that thing ever got out of control—" I thought of that for a moment and then pulled myself together. There was something else I had to do before I could be sure that the peril in Julian's apparatus was ended forever. I have to talk to Mrs. Walters. Anne stared at me as if I were suddenly demented. "All right. She's in the kitchen, I think." "Don't come with me," I said. "This isn't going to be nice." I left her sitting on the running board. Once I turned and looked back. She was still there. I saw her give a sort of mock salute with her hand and then reach for the chamois with which she'd been doing the car. It felt good to see her, just to know that she was there, because what I had to do now was a thing which I could contemplate only with loathing. On a sudden impulse, I did not go in the kitchen door, but went round to the front and wrenched open the door into the hall. Then I went upstairs to my room and took the bottle of whiskey out of my bag. I poured about 4 stiff fingers of it down my throat, and then sat down to think. I would have to act quickly if I was to prevent Julian from going on with that thing of his, and yet there was a pang of regret in my mind at the thought of what I had to do. For he had accomplished something that no man before him had ever achieved. He had gone out to the very edge of the physical world, and beyond it. In some way which I did not begin to understand, that black thing I had seen was an aperture. What it opened into, or upon, was no concern of mine. I did not want even to speculate about that. There was nothing on which to go. But my theory about its nature was the only possible one. Of that I was sure. I took another small and careful drink. The evidence for my conclusion was purely circumstantial, but that was plenty. The rush of air into the center of the thing, as if it were being drawn into a complete vacuum, the fact that neither the air nor the things it had carried with it returned, the very appearance of the blackness, like an extra-dimensional whirlpool, and, above everything else, the cold conviction that the thing which Julian Blair's potential created was beyond all the bounds of our universe. It seemed to me that something in my mind recognized it. It was absurd, of course, and yet how had Julian created this thing? By magnifying the radiations, the waves given off by the human brain and nervous system. Something like that, according to his own account. I snatched my thoughts back from the gulf toward which they were headed. If man were not altogether a physical being, if he possessed in himself a contact with an existence neither spatial nor of time, and if that contact were to be artificially produced, even by sheer imitation of the sort to which Julian had openly confessed, then what would be created would be no bridge, but a mechanical, arbitrary rent in the warp and woof of the fabric of the physical universe. A lesion, indeed, through which everything known streamed into the unknown. A hole in the dike. No, that wasn't quite accurate. A leak in the helmet of the diver would be closer. I got up then and went down into the kitchen. Mrs. Walters was there, not working, but simply sitting heavily in a chair looking out the window. Her face looked older than it had before, and there was something at once defiant and defeated about her. I sat down across the table and looked at her. "Mrs. Walters, I want to talk to you for a few minutes." She turned her head slowly away from the window. "About what? I should think you had accomplished everything you wanted now." There was bitterness in her final word. "He has showed you the communicator. You know as much as I do. More, perhaps, because you are a scientist and I am not. But remember that I contributed as much to that thing as Julian. I have given him everything I could. I have worked for years. I have protected him and it in ways that you and all your kind would never have the courage to do. Now I suppose he's through with me." The whiskey was warm inside me. I felt a certain impersonal pity for her, a desire to make this easy. But I did not dare. "Listen," I said, "that thing of Julian's is dangerous. Maybe he knows how dangerous it is, but if he does, he won't admit it. I doubt if you have any conception. I doubt if you have any conception. I'm not even sure that I'm right, but I'm sure enough to act on what I believe. Have you got a key to that room?" "No." Her voice was heavy and noncommittal. "Have you ever had one?" "No." "I want you to promise me that you will never, even if you have the opportunity, touch that thing again, at least until I am sure about it." She smiled unpleasantly. "So it's got you, too," she observed. "You see now that your friend Julian is not mad, as you thought so charitably when you came here, and you want to control it for yourself." "Have it any way you like," I said, "but I know one thing. Nobody must touch that machine of his again." "I make no promises." "In that case, I'll have to threaten you." There was an abrupt stiffening to her bulky body, a sort of wary tension to the way she sat. "I have nothing of which to be afraid." "Haven't you?" I said. "Well, perhaps not. But I think you do. Something recent, Mrs. Walters. Something connected with Elora Marcy." The words fell into the silence between us. She made no answer to them. I went on. "I think I know one thing now. That is, the way Mrs. Marcy was killed. I think, to go a step further, that the thing that made those injuries across her chest, that broke her arms, was not a rock ledge, nor even the edge of a stair. I think it was the edge of a table." She stared at me. "You're crazy." Her voice was no more than a whisper. "Am I? I hope so." I got up. "But unless you're quite sure that I am, I suggest that you do as I say. Remember, Mrs. Walters, how that air jams you forward toward the blackness? Suppose someone were in that room. Suppose that someone had separate access to that room only once a week, when she had temporary possession of the key to let the cleaning woman in. Suppose that person was afraid that the apparatus was almost finished, and that the man who had built it proposed to throw it away by making it public. Suppose that he had been working alone on it a great deal. What do you think such a person might do?
This is all impossible.
Certainly. But while Mrs. Marcy was sweeping the floor, this person, a woman, went to the apparatus. She lifted the covering from the control panel. There was the lever, convenient to her hand. There was the opportunity to find out, once for all, if the thing worked. In such a blinding instant of temptation, even a woman of your control might have weakened, might have lost all caution, might have thrown that lever over toward the right, and thrown it too far. The blackness sprang into existence, and with a strength of which you had never dreamed. Mrs. Marcy was, perhaps, between the window and the open edge of the table. The gust of air struck her back. She was a light woman, anyhow. She was hurled forward and killed. How did you manage to shut the machine off? I had her. She made no sign of defeat, but for the first time since I had known her, she was looking down at the floor. Her voice was low. The control panel saved me. My body must have knocked the lever back. Lucky, I commented, but your moment of stupidity was over. You thought of everything. How you managed, I don't know. Perhaps you'd got Mrs. Marcy's body to the foot of the stairs before he saw you. Perhaps he knows the whole thing. Anyhow, he was stunned by your treachery and the accident itself. You persuaded him to let you handle it. You saw us coming across the meadow and persuaded us that Mrs. Marcy had had a fall. It was a wonderful job. Then you got us out of the way, Anne and me, and covered up what had happened. As I spoke, the details of what she must have done came crowding into my mind. You have small feet. You went out in the rain twice, first with your own shoes, then Mrs. Marcy's. That second time it was you, not she, who went into the river. That took courage. I admire you for it. Anne said you were a wonderful swimmer, but I forgot that until this moment. I suppose you landed down near the house here? She nodded. There were no words left in her. You put Mrs. Marcy's shoes back on her body. Then you carried it out of the house and put it in the river. I suppose the whole thing didn't take half an hour. You came back to the house, changed your dress, and were waiting for us when we got back with Dr. Rambouillet. What are you going to do about it? I don't know yet. You haven't, at least in my eyes, committed any crime. I suppose that technically and legally you're guilty of several things, but the criminal thing you did was to turn on that apparatus of Julian's when he was not in the room. I had to know, she said. What I don't yet understand, any more than you, is what the apparatus of his really does. All I know is that it's a horror, more dangerous than if this house was stored solid with nitroglycerin. That's why I want your promise that you will never touch that machine again. A thought occurred to me, and that you will go away from here at the first opportunity, as soon as the sheriff gives any of us permission. She stood up at that, and the humility was gone out of her. She had heard the worst there was to say, and she was fighting now, suddenly. And leave you alone with Julian? I hope you don't think I swallow that sermon of yours about the danger of the communicator. Julian and I know that it is not yet perfect, but you've seen enough to know that it will work. You've seen the edge of the other world about which I think I know more than you. She sneered openly. After all, Professor Sayles, you're only a two-bit professor in a college. You aren't the kind of man that Julian is. But you want the glory of being associated with him now, at the end, when the years of work are over. Well, I won't do it. I want something to show for what I've done. I won't go away. I intend to stay right here. Get me out if you can. I looked at her steadily. I've warned you. She gave no ground. You can't do a thing to me without involving all of us, and Julian most of all. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Mrs. Walters, I said, I've told you everything that's on my mind. After this morning, I won't hesitate to involve all of us if I have to do it in order to get that damn thing of Julian's stopped. Including Anne, I suppose. Including her, if it's unavoidable. Thank you, she said, for telling me so plainly what you intend to do. With that, she walked past me and out the kitchen door. It slammed behind her. I felt good about that interview. It seemed to me that I had been right, that I had taken the wisest course, and that the control of the situation in this terrible house was now in my hands. After a time, I changed my mind. That was when I heard the roar of the car backing out of the garage. By the time I got outside, it was already diminishing up the road toward the village. I watched it go with complete incomprehension. It was only when I saw Anne standing beside the doorway, looking after the car with as much bewilderment as my own, that I understood how far out of my control events actually were. Chapter 29. For heaven's sake! Anne sounded half amused, half furious. You said you were going to talk to her, but I never thought you were going to have that much effect. She's mad, Dick. Oh, yes, I admitted. She came stamping out the back door and just climbed into the car without a word. I was doing the front fender when she got in. She just backed the car right out from under my hand. She held up the chamois skin in proof. Or chamois. What in the world did you say to her? Amongst other things, I told her she was responsible for Mrs. Marcy's death and how she fooled all the rest of us. I threatened to tell somebody about it if she didn't do what I wanted, which was to go away at once. So she's running away? No, I admitted slowly. I don't think so. I think she's trying to steal a march on us. If she does... My mind raced ahead, trying to estimate the probabilities, and it seemed to me that they were not promising. If she does, it will almost have to be at Julian's expense. Anne said, I don't know what you're talking about. What did Mrs. Walters have to do with Alora's death? She didn't kill her, did she? No, not that bad. I summarized most of it for her, being careful to say as little as I could about the nature of what I had seen in Julian's workroom. I said there had been an accident in there, and then hurried on to the rest of the story. Anne listened without interrupting me. Now, I said, she's gone, but I have an idea she'll be back, and I don't know what to do in the meantime. Anne remarked thoughtfully, We better tell Uncle Julian. Then I think we might have lunch, cooked by my own fair hands. She was even smiling. I liked the way she took it. Not a reproach to me for having bungled things, nor a single word about the likelihood that we were in for an even more unpleasant time than anything that had happened so far. As we were walking back to the house, she remarked once, Poor Uncle Julian, and that was all. In the kitchen she turned and confronted me quietly. Before you talk to Uncle Julian, she said, I just want you to know that whatever happens, it'll be all right with me. Thanks. The words seemed inadequate, so I tried thanking her another way. That was better. Finally, I said, Darling, this is the craziest thing of all. I'm 12 years older than you. In that case, she said softly, I think it's high time you stopped being a chivalrous idiot. So I did my best. Chapter 30. Julian was actually sleeping when I went up to his room. I woke him as gently as I could, and I told him that he had better come down right away and have a talk. He looked at me curiously. What's happened, my boy? I'll tell you later, Julian. He got up and straightened his clothes.
"Let me have my key again."
"No. You won't need it until after lunch, at least. You've been half starving yourself lately, Julian. You eat with us first, and then we'll see." He sluiced his face in the wash basin and combed his hair in the old, impatient way.
"Richard, I just want to remind you that you are a college professor and not a male nurse."
"The rest did you good," I told him. "You sound pretty chipper."
"Yes, but this is all a waste of time. I must get back to work right away. Have you been thinking about our problem?"
"Yes."
"And what is your conclusion?"
"After lunch," I said inexorably. "Come along now." Anne's idea of a meal was infinitely more edible than Mrs. Walter's had been. Julian ate a surprising amount, and though I wanted to burst right out with my story and explain what had happened, I managed to restrain myself. Still, the tick of the kitchen clock seemed to me faster and faster. As soon as the meal was over, I told Julian directly that I had confronted Mrs. Walters with the facts about Mrs. Marcy's death. He listened without any comment.
"That is so, Richard," he admitted finally. "At least, it must be. I was not, as you surmised, in the room when the accident occurred, but I knew what must have happened. Somehow I was so startled and horrified that I did not think as clearly as I should have. I let her do what she wanted. It was all about as you described it. She came to me afterward, told me what she had done, and I agreed to back her up. I wish now—"
"Meantime," I interrupted, "she's gone into town, or somewhere, and I'm afraid of what she may do."
If she tells the true story—"
"If she tells the true story, with variations," Anne inquired, "what do you think will happen?" The same wonder had been in my own mind. I suppose we'd have to submit to a second inquiry. Anyhow, I think the thing to do as soon as we can is to get a lawyer. Julian's expression had been slowly changing as he thought over what I had told him. A set look had come into his face.
"Richard," he said finally, "I want that key. I want it right now."
"Listen, Julian, don't go back to work yet a while. Not till I've had a chance to talk to you about the other part of it. About that other part of it."
"Are you trying to tell me that you won't give me the key?"
I began to be alarmed by what I saw in his face, but I held my ground. "Yes, Julian, that's what I mean. The key stays in my pocket until after this whole mess is over. That thing of yours is too dangerous. I don't think you understand quite how appalling it is, Julian." He looked as if I had put a knife in his ribs.
"But, Dick, can't you see how little time—"
His face was pitiful. I found myself suddenly hating the role I was playing.
"You must realize, Dick, that if anything were to happen before I finish, everything will be lost. It will be a failure. You're enough of a scientist to know that no one else could complete my work."
I knew that. I know it still. I trust with all my heart that those words of Julian's were true, but there is just a chance that they were not. And I hope that if there is anyone, now or ever, who tries to follow in Julian's track, he will be fully aware, as Julian was not, of what his work will mean. That whirling gulf of blackness is not a mere danger like an explosive. It is, in the end, a breach in the whole of life. How much it is capable of devouring once it is set loose, I do not think any one can predict. Julian's plea made me feel like a traitor, but it did not shake my determination. Even treachery to a friend can be the lesser of two evils. I turned through the door. "Let's go into the living room a minute," I said to him. "I want to try to explain, Julian, why I'm doing this to you." I remember a few things after those words. I recollect opening the door into the hall. I have a vague image of a sudden burst of stars inside my skull and then a roaring blackness diminishing into oblivion. The next thing I saw was Anne's face, bending over me, white and frightened. My head was a jumble of pain and confused thoughts. It appeared to be lying in her lap. After a while, I made out the shape of the stairs, and I knew that I was still in the hall.
"Dick," she was saying. "Dick, darling."
"I'm all right." The pain in my head was so terrific that I could hardly think. But there was something more important than my head, something I had to remember. "Where's the key?" I said, and began to fumble in my pocket. It was gone, of course.
"Lie still," she said. "You'll feel better in a minute."
"The key, Anne! He's got the key!" I tried to sit up, but it was no go. "Listen, darling," I said. "Don't worry about me. Go upstairs right away and listen at his door. Find out where he is somehow, and come back and tell me." She lowered my head to the floor gently.
"You be absolutely quiet now."
"Sure," I said. "Only hurry." I lay there through several eternities of time until I heard her feet on the stairs.
"He's in the laboratory," she told me, "working at something. He wouldn't let me in."
"Oh, God," I said, and tried to sit up again. This time I succeeded, after a fashion. When the walls, floor, and ceiling of the hall stopped going round, I looked at her and tried to smile. You'd never think he was strong enough to hit that hard. What did he do it with? She held out the heavy-duty flashlight that they kept in the hall.
It weighs pounds. How do you feel now?"
Jesus, that would do it. I examined the back of my head with cautious fingers. There's gonna be a lump there, but I'm better. I don't think he broke anything. I got a firm grip on the bottom of one of the balusters and hauled at it. After a while, I was on my feet. Once again, the room spun round me, but this time it came to rest sooner. Anne was watching me. "Give me a hand," I said. "I'll try the sofa in the living room for a while, and if there's any ice, you might bring me a chunk of it." With my arm over her shoulders, I managed to make the living room. Julian must have hit me a fearful crack. The whole back of my head was throbbing with every pulse beat. Anne told me to lie still while she got something and slipped quickly out of the room. I tried to think what was to be done. There was no sense reproaching myself for a fool. I had simply underestimated the desperation that keeping the key from him would engender in Julian's tortured mind. The imperative thing was to stop him from trying that apparatus of his again. My head was throbbing like an anvil on which an incandescent iron was being beaten into shape, but a single idea did come to me. If the power cable could be cut, the current would be shut off. That would stop him, and that was the only thing that would. But I dared not send Anne out to climb a pole and cut it. If Mrs. Walters had not taken the car, she could have thrown a rope over the cable, fastened it to the bumper, and simply pulled till something tore loose. But any such expedient was out of the question now. I tried standing up alone. That was no dice. The agony in my head and the weakness in every part of me made it impossible to take a step. I sat down on the sofa with a groan. Anne heard it as she came in.
"What are you trying to do?" she demanded. "Sit still."
She had brought some pieces of ice and a towel, and she put them immediately against the back of my head. It may not have been the medically orthodox thing to do, but it helped. The waves of fire inside my skull gradually went out. "Thanks," I said after a time. "That's the ticket, all right." She was looking at me with such anxiety and sympathy that I wanted simply to surrender to it. But the thought of Julian kept me from it. I wondered what to do. So he's locked himself up in there. So he's locked himself in up there.
"Yes."
The house seemed utterly still. I don't hear the noise.
"It isn't going."
"It will be," I said. A thought struck me. "Listen, dearest, do me a favor and don't argue at all about this. Get clean outside this building and just wait. I want to try to talk to him through the door. But if I'm right, this house is no place to be in right now. God knows what he will do. He knows that he hasn't got time for anything much. He may turn that thing on full. If he does, I don't want you to be around." She kissed me.
"You don't suppose I'm going to leave you, Dick?"
I wanted to argue with her, but there was no opportunity. We heard something that made me aware the time for talk was over. There was the noise of a car, 2 cars, 3, roaring into the yard. People were arriving, and I thought I could guess who and why they had come. "All right," I told her. "This is the payoff. Stick with me and don't say a word more than you have to." Chapter 31. They came through the back door without knocking. We could hear their feet in the kitchen. In a minute the living room was full of them. Big Dan Hoskins was the first, moving with deceptive calm. Behind him was the man who had spoken to me outside the store that morning, the deputy, Pete Barnstable. Seth Marcy, of course, and his taxi driver cousin, his narrow eyes sharp with excitement and a vicious sort of satisfaction. There were others, too, several of them. Last of all, 2 women. One of them was Mrs. Walters. The other, inevitably, was Ellen Hoskins, looking quietly anxious. I wondered what Mrs. Walters had told them all, but there was no time for speculation. "Where's Blair?" the sheriff demanded, looking down at me. "Upstairs," I told him. He whirled on his feet and started for the door. "Wait a minute, Sheriff, and listen to me before you do anything. He's locked himself in up there, and he's desperate."
"Desperate or not, he's got something to answer for."
"What?"
"Causing a fatal accident. Reporting failure to report the same. Conniving to cover the whole thing up."
"The bastard," said Seth Marcy, and his voice was heavy with satisfaction.
"Most of that," I pointed out, "was done by Mrs. Walters here."
"You're all guilty, if it comes to that. But Blair's gonna be under arrest the minute I lay my hands on him. I done my best for you people, but I'm through."
He went out the door. There was a general surge after him.
"If I need the rest of you," his voice came back down the stairs, "I'll call you."
There was silence in the room for a minute after he left. They stared down at Anne and me on the sofa, their faces heavy with anger and a kind of fierce pleasure. I felt cornered, but I hope I didn't show it. Anne sat perfectly quiet beside me. After a minute she opened her compact and powdered her nose. It was the first time I had seen her do that, and I knew it was a gesture of defiance. Ellen Hoskins chuckled, but Seth Marcy scowled. He shouldered his way past Pete Barnstable and halted in front of me.
"Get up,"
he said to me. "Don't, Dick," Anne said, and then to Seth Marcy, "He's hurt."
"Not as much as he's gonna be."
His heavy boot caught me square in the shin. For a moment I thought the bone would break. He drew his foot back again.
"I aim," he said slowly, "to teach you something, you dirty woman-killing son of a bitch."
That time the kick did not land. Ellen Hoskins caught his ankle on the backswing with the crook of her umbrella handle.
"Your language is nasty, Seth," she said calmly.
"Yeah," said Pete Barnstable. "That's enough rough stuff, Seth. We'll give these folks what's coming to 'em legal."
He grinned.
"You see, Professor Sales, I am not a good person to threaten."
It was Mrs. Walters' voice.
"Shut up, you,"
said the deputy. I looked at Ellen Hoskins. The pain in my leg and the heavy throbbing in my head made it hard to keep my voice under control. "What did she say to you?" I asked. Ellen looked at me curiously, without pity but with no hate.
"She simply told Dan how you had all arranged Mrs. Marcy's death to look like an accident, how Mr. Blair planned the thing, how she made the footprints, how you, Professor, put the body in the river before Miss Connor and you drove into town and got Dr. Rambouillet."
"You believe that?"
"I don't know."
Anne looked at Seth Marcy steadily until he dropped his eyes.
"For the first time," she said pleasantly, "I see how lucky Elora really was. I used to wonder where she got those bruises on her arms. I see now, of course. You used to beat her."
Big Dan's feet were loud on the stairs before there was any answer to Anne's quiet speech. He came into the room and confronted me.
Well, you were right. He's locked in there all right, and he won't come out. It's a steel door, and I don't reckon it'll break easy. We'll have to go in through the windows.
There are steel shutters on those. He glared at me.
Go outside, Pete, and take a look.
The deputy reluctantly made his way through the crowd. After he had gone, the sheriff demanded of me,
You been inside there?
Yes.
What's he got in the place? Any weapons? Guns?
Nothing, I told him, but a piece of scientific apparatus. But I wouldn't break in. If I were you, I'd get out of this house fast as I could.
Why?
Because that apparatus of his is the most dangerous thing I've ever seen in my life. The difficulty of explaining that seemed too much to me in the state I was in. I have an idea you'll be finding that out before long. Did Mrs. Walters tell you about it?
She said it was kind of a crazy machine for talking long distances.
That's right, I told him. Very long distances. For talking with the dead. I let that sink into a silence that was suddenly so intense that I had an insane desire to laugh at the lot of them. The reason Mrs. Walters didn't tell you the whole story, as well as the reason she wants to implicate us with herself, is because she believes in the thing. She thinks it will work, and she wants to have it for herself. The sheriff was nonplussed. He looked, I was interested to notice, first toward his sister. Seth Marcy said,
Let's cart the whole lot of 'em back to town, Dan. Couple of nights in the cooler and they won't talk brash like this rooster anymore.
Ellen Hoskins' voice was cool. You don't seem to believe in this invention of Mr. Blair's.
Not in that way, I answered, but I meant what I said about its being dangerous. I thought perhaps she might believe me, so I went on. I saw it work this morning. It builds up a potential somehow, creates a vortex in space. I don't know exactly what. But if he turns it full on, the lot of us may, or may not, be here after it's over.
She nodded. Dan, she said, why don't you let Professor Sales talk with Mr. Blair? Maybe he can persuade him to come out.
No, I said, he won't come out for me. You'll have to get through that door somehow. Maybe a blowtorch will do it. Then I remembered my earlier idea. Anyhow, Sheriff, don't think too much about getting him out right now. The most important thing of all is to cut off the electric power that runs through The most important thing of all is to cut off the electric power that runs that thing of his. Tell one of your men to do it right away, for the love of God. He looked at me curiously.
Why?
So he can't work it, I answered impatiently. Hurry up, I tell you. The big man did not move.
That ain't in my province. Anything I do to get him out is one thing. Destroying property except in line of duty is another. He's just trying to distract you, Dan.
It was the taxi driver again.
You folks talk a lot out here, the sheriff said. I can't tell the sense from the lies.
He made no further move. I opened my mouth to plead with him once more, but before I could say anything, Pete Barnstable came in, his jaw sagging.
That's right about the shutters, Dan. You can see it from the ground that they're all made out of steel, like a safe, and they're all shut tight. Reckon we won't get in that way.
The sheriff nodded. He told off a man to drive it to town and bring back a blowtorch at once. As an afterthought, he ordered Ellen Hoskins to go along, but she shook her head.
I can look after myself, Dan, and you'll need a record of what happens. I'm needed here.
He shrugged his tremendous shoulders.
Have it your own way, Ellen, he said.
Then he looked over the room.
I don't guess we'll be needing the rest of you, he observed. You better clear out. This here's the law, not a tar and feathering, or a wire pulling, he added for my benefit.
They showed no disposition to leave at first, but he simply stood there and waited. After a while, they began a sheepish sort of exodus. In 5 minutes, the room was clear except for Seth Marcy and his cousin. Dan Hoskins looked at them.
I'll call you if I need you, he said.
Seth stood his ground. "I ain't staying right here till you get that crazy bugger out in that room, Dan. It was my wife." Ellen Hoskins sniffed audibly. For my part, I did not care what happened. Things were beginning to seem shadowy to me. The pain in my head and my leg were almost unendurable. I simply sat still and waited. Most of my mind was not in the room, anyhow. With Julian locked in that place of his upstairs, I felt it didn't matter much what happened down here. He knew, he must know, that this was his last opportunity with the thing on which he had labored so long and with such passionate hope and faith. What chance was there, I asked myself, that he would not try it once again? And having tried, and failed, would he not throw that fatal lever clear to the right? My imagination failed to picture what would happen then. The sheriff cleared his throat indecisively.
"All right, Seth," he said at last. "You can stay if you behave yourself, but he'll have to go."
The cousin shifted his narrow eyes from Seth to the sheriff and back again. Neither of them gave him a sign. In the end, he muttered to Seth,
"Give him one for me,"
and went out. We could hear the sound of his car starting out back and then the rasp of gears. He was gone.
"Now, Professor, I want you to go upstairs with me and we'll try talking to him through the door once again. Ellen, you and Miss Connor and Mrs. Walters stay down here with Seth and Pete."
I stood up on my good leg and set the other to the ground. It hurt like the devil, but I could stand on it. As I went past Seth Marcy, I looked him in the eye. "Like to try it again?" I asked. "Sure." He started a punch that might have killed me if it had landed. I caught him full in the throat with my fist and let him have the other under the ear as he went down. His breath came out of his windpipe with a heavy gurgle. "That's for the shin," I said, "and to help you keep a civil tongue."
"You shouldn't have done that, Professor,"
the sheriff said while I was pulling myself up the stairs. "I know. You didn't see him kick me in the leg a minute ago while I was sitting on the sofa, but your sister did. If she wants to press the charge, go ahead." He grunted.
"Seth's kind of mean sometimes."
The hall was dark. We stood at the head of the stairs and looked around us. "Listen," I said to the sheriff, "I want you to promise one thing. If you begin to hear something you've never heard before, don't stay with me. Go down those stairs like a bat out of hell and get everybody outside at once. That thing he's got in there is perfectly capable of destroying the house. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but your sister's down there." He looked at me carefully, as if to find out whether I was telling the truth, then nodded, and we went slowly down the hall together. The window at the end was a dull gray. Twilight was already gathering in the air outside. We stood a while outside the cold steel of the door, listening. Julian was moving around inside. There was the occasional clink of metal on metal, and another sound that puzzled me at first. It was, I realized finally, Julian muttering to himself. The sound of his feet on the floor when he moved was hurried. "Julian!" I cried and pounded on the metal. "It's Dick! Open the door!" "Go away!" His voice was urgent, defiant, curiously roughened, as if he were breathing hard and with difficulty. "Julian, for the love of God, leave that thing alone! The house is full of people. It isn't safe!" His steps came rapidly across the floor, louder as they drew nearer. "Richard," he said, and I could even hear him panting. I tried to pant, and it did not go well for me. "I will never open this door. Get away from it. You're only making me lose time." The sheriff stirred at my side.
"We'll have to burn the door down if you don't come out, Mr. Blair. This is the law. Dan Hoskins, sheriff." "Sheriff."
There was something hysterical in the laugh with which Julian answered him, and we could hear his footfalls receding. I had a sudden flash of understanding. He was laughing because a lummox of a county sheriff wanted to stand between him and the greatest enterprise, and the maddest, He was laughing because a lummox of a country sheriff wanted to stand between him and the greatest enterprise, and the maddest, which a man ever undertook. I tried once more. "Julian!" I shouted and hammered at the door till my fist ached. "Think what you're doing! Anne's here! If you start that thing again, you may be endangering her! Let me in, for God's sake!" His voice was curiously thin and far away as it came to me through the steel of the door.
"Too late," he said. "Too late, Dick. This time I'm going to find out."
The rest of what he may have said was lost in the whispered hum that began to fill the air round us. The sheriff turned a white face in that gloom of the hall.
My God,
he said. I gave him the hardest push I could from only one sound leg. "That's it, you fool!" I shouted. "Get them out of there! Get them out of here! Then cut the wire if there's time! I'll keep on trying, but get downstairs and get them out!"
Jesus,
he said wonderingly, and then he was off down the hall. His feet lumbered loud and heavily on the stairs, but I did not listen to his going. The draft was beginning to suck round my ankles. "Julian! Not all the way, Julian!" I could hear no answer. Very likely my voice never reached him at all. The roaring tumult of that thing inside was growing with every passing second. I could see it in the eye of my imagination, hovering now in the space between the ceiling and the black table, already ominously grown. If only the power had been cut off! But it was too late now. I turned to go down the hall. The farther away I was when it happened, the greater the chance that I might escape. But I had no real hope, only an instinct to try even the most forlorn chance. The wind in the hall was so strong now that I could scarcely make progress against it. The noise was cataract loud, but even through it I could hear the timbers of the old house cracking. Dust began to fill the air so that I could scarcely see my way. It came swirling up from every crevice between the boards, sucked out by the air. I looked back. The steel door, it seemed to me, was coming loose on its hinges. I could see a thin line of yellow light along the top and bottom of its surface. The noise of the maelstrom inside was so terrific that I could no longer hear. It was like being in the heart of a cyclone. Somewhere between Julian's door and the head of the stairs the thing happened. The old house had been strained even beyond the power of shipwright's timbering to resist. There was a crash, a series of crashes. Plaster fell from the ceiling somewhere. Boards screamed as they were wrenched loose from their moorings of 100 years. And then there was a clap of thunder so loud that nothing which had gone before it mattered. I found myself lying on the floor of the hall. I was numb, almost without feeling of any sort. Plaster was scattered in fine lumps over my head and shoulders, and it gritted under my palms when I got myself heavily into a sitting position and leaned against the wall. But the thing was over. I drew a deep breath and coughed. Dust and powdered plaster were in every cubic centimeter of the atmosphere. Gradually I pushed myself up against the wall. I wondered dully about Anne. The sheriff had had enough time to get her out. I prayed that he had. Then I began to grope my way back down the hall, littered as it was with wreckage. Why I went that way instead of toward the stairs I could not have said. But go I did, feeling my way along the wall. I made slow time of it, partly because I was dazed and more because the air was blindingly full of plaster dust. Before I had gone 10 feet, a voice bellowed up the stairs behind me. I knew it must be Dan Hoskins, but I paid no attention. The dust was beginning to settle, and I could make out the rectangle of the window. The whole of the sash had been torn away, but the frame was still there. I put each foot down cautiously, and tried to see whether the floor was complete under me. It seemed to be. The door of Julian's room was gone from its hinges. I stumbled into the place, my eyes smarting. The place was so altered, even in the grey light of the 3 windows from which the shutters appeared to have been blown bodily inward, that I hardly knew it. Plaster, lathing, boards, bits of glass, fragments of ebonite, and pieces of wire were everywhere. The ceiling, I saw, had been forced inward and was wrecked over the whole of its middle. The floor bulged upward, except at the center, and there it gaped open in an irregular hole that must have been several feet across. "Julian!" I shouted his name aloud, but I knew that he would never answer me, that he must, inevitably, be dead. There was no reply. I moved cautiously into the room, looking in the litter at my feet for what I dreaded to find. Before I reached the center of the room, the white, sharp glare of a flashlight cut through the murk behind me, and I saw the bulk of the sheriff in the doorway.
"Professor," he shouted, "are you here?"
"Yes, I'm here," I said. He came cautiously up to me, walking close to the walls. The remnants of the floor creaked under his weight, but it held.
"Where's Mr. Blair?"
"I haven't found him yet." He ran the finger of his light over the floor. I have never seen anything so completely devastated as that room. It seemed to me, as he picked out one fragment of debris after another, that there was, on the whole, less volume of wreckage than I would have expected, but greater destruction. One steel shutter was lying near the edge of the hole in the floor. Another still hung, bent limply double from a single hinge, so that it lolloped into the room like one of Dali's deliquescent watches. Of the table, there was no trace except the fragments I have mentioned.
"There he is!"
the sheriff exclaimed suddenly and began to circle the rim of the crater in the floor. I saw what he meant. A body was lying almost on the lip of the hole. The sheriff stopped opposite it and crawled toward the thing. Gingerly he reached out a hand and drew it toward him. It came with a sudden and horrible ease, and, as it moved, it made a scratching noise on the floor. I knew then what he had found. Not Julian, but one of the 7 who had sat around the table. His lamp played on it for a moment, and then I heard him scuttling abruptly backward.
"Jesus!"
There was unadulterated horror in his voice.
"That wasn't a man, Professor."
"I know. There were 7 of them once. I can't see the others, but maybe these snarls of wire are what's left of them." The sheriff, back against the comparative safety of the wall, played his light over the room. His hand shook, but he did it methodically. The bar of light probed the place from corner to corner and from end to end. Twice he moved to scuff at a heap of rubble. When it was all over, he came and stood beside me.
"You try,"
he said. "There's no use," I told him. "He's not here."
"You mean he got away? Damn it!"
"No, he didn't do that either."
"What are you giving me, a Chinese puzzle?"
"Call it that if you want. But don't look at me, Sheriff. Try looking for that steel door. It must have weighed 200 pounds. And where is it now? There's a shutter or two missing, and a lot of other things that were in here. They're gone, too. Some of them," I said slowly, "were a lot heavier than a man." The numbness that had clotted my thoughts began to lift. "What about the others? What about the others?" I demanded, and my voice sounded surprisingly loud and harsh in that room. "Are they all right?"
"Yep, I got 'em out, like you said to."
"Let's go, then," I said. "There's nothing here."
"We ain't found 'em yet."
I started for the door. "I'll look downstairs under the hole in the floor. If I find him, I'll holler."
Do that."
"Do that." He sounded suddenly as if the whole thing were a nightmare past believing. I left him, still pushing at heaps of rubbish with his foot. But I knew he wouldn't find Julian. There was almost nothing in the living room under that hole up into Julian's laboratory. Even the plaster must have been sucked clean through, up and into that maw of darkness there at the last. I shouted through the hole, "Nothing at all down here! Not even plaster!" The sheriff's voice boomed down at me.
"Wait outside, Professor. I'll be down in a minute."
They were all standing in a huddled group on the edge. They were all standing in a huddled group on the edge and triangle of ground at the end of the point, almost at the water's edge, 100 yards away from the house. The moment I started toward them, there was a cry, and a figure came flying across the grass toward me. Anne. Her arms were round me in one instant. That made up for the rest of it. We held each other for a while and laughed and babbled incoherencies, and she exclaimed at the plaster in my hair, and we kissed each other. Then I hobbled over to the rest of them with my arm around her. I looked at Mrs. Walters first. "He's gone," I said. She did not flinch. "And the communicator?" "What's still there is wire and powder. I think the thing got most of it." Ellen Hoskins' voice in the dusk was cold as steel.
"It was all for nothing, then, Mrs. Walters."
The big woman turned and faced her.
"So you believe that ninny of a girl?"
Ellen's voice was still light, but its tone was unyielding.
"You're a great actress, my dear, but you should never have asked him that question about the communicator. That gave you away. You must have wanted it very much."
Mrs. Walters said nothing. In the shadow it was impossible to make out her impression. Suddenly she spoke.
"Look," she said, "the light's on the road."
We all turned our heads at her exclamation. Far up along the head of the bay and even closer, along the road down the point, we could see the headlamps of cars. There seemed to be dozens of them headed toward the house. It gave me a sensation of panic to see them coming on. I knew who was in those cars. The people of Barsham Harbor.
"Reckon they heard the explosion,"
said a voice that sounded like Pete Barnstable's. They must have done so, of course. I wondered what would happen to us when they arrived. It was in my mind that we could expect short shrift from them, but I was too tired to care. Mrs. Walters was no longer in front of me when I dragged my eyes away from the oncoming lights. None of the shadowy outlines I scanned seemed to be hers. "Where's Mrs. Walters?" I asked with a sudden feeling that something was happening of which I ought to be aware and wasn't. For a second no one answered. Then we saw her, on the very tip of the point, standing alone. There was enough light left to turn the water of the river into a dull steel color, and show the line of ripples where the current sucked against the ultimate rock and swirled away toward the sea. We all shouted. Pete Barnstable broke into a lumbering run, but he had no possible chance of catching her. She was into the river before he had gone 3 steps. That was the last of it, the end of her ambition and her dream. The river took her out of our sight and world. Once I thought I saw the black outline of her head against the water and the flash of drops as she lifted her arm to swim, but I could not be sure. Chapter 32. Sometimes Anne and I wonder whether she got clean away, swimming with the ebb of the tide till she came to land in some deserted place. If she did so, we have never heard of her since, and there is not much chance that it was so. The river had been kind to her once, there at the end of the haying road by Seth Marcy's farm, but I do not believe that it was again. That water was too cold, too deep, too implacably strong even for her indomitable will. We are both happier, I think, in believing that Mrs. Walters never left the river again, and yet, when we speak of her, as we sometimes do, it is with a reluctant admiration. As for the rest of it, we do not talk about that often. We were, I suppose, exceptionally lucky to come out of the whole thing with no more than several uncomfortable days of interrogation and examination in Barsham Harbor. The crowd of angry, shouting citizens who arrived at the point soon after Mrs. Walters escaped meant business. What they might have done without the presence of Dan Hoskins, I don't care to speculate. He took us through the seething crowd of them with a heavy-shouldered insistence, a glowering obstinacy about it doing his duty. Even so, he might not have succeeded if he had not had the fire to attract their attention to something besides ourselves. The house began to burn within a few minutes after Mrs. Walters had plunged into the river. The cataclysm that destroyed Julian's laboratory must have ripped the insulation from the power cables somewhere, and, of course, the whole building was tinder dry after a century of existence. It burned high and yellow against a dark sky. Perhaps she saw it from the water before the end, lifting her head to gaze back at the house for one final look. We watched it from the sheriff's car as we went toward the town, along the far shore of the bay. The distance shrank it to a house in a microcosm. The distance shrank it to a house in a microcosm, but it burned with a fierce, bright splendor. Of Julian we speak scarcely at all these days, but neither of us believes, I think, that he was in the house when it burned. We know that he was neither there nor in any other part of this substantial earth. Where that black vortex may have taken him, I do not even speculate. It may have snatched him to itself, as it must have devoured everything that it could tear loose from that room. But the few times when I have tried to imagine what that final moment was like for him, my mind does not picture it quite that way. The funnel of blackness must have grown hideously large by then. Perhaps it filled most of the room, from ceiling to floor. I think Julian may have made no effort to resist it. At least, in the picture of my mind, he is simply walking into it, like a man going through a door. And that was The Edge of Running Water by William Sloane, from The Rim of Morning, 2 Tales of Cosmic Horror. So, there is one additional detail I wish to impart upon you people about this particular novel, and that is that it has a reach beyond being a novel. There is, in fact, a movie, which I can't remember the name of. The Edge of Running Water. You can hear all the clacks of my batons. The Devil Commands. That's it. I forget what year that was made in. 41. Which means this story must have been pretty popular, because that's like a 3-year turnaround, 4-year turnaround. Made by Universal Pictures? Or was it Columbia? Columbia, not Universal, sorry. When was this? 39. So an even faster turnaround. Basically, it got optioned to a movie practically immediately after its publication. It has Boris Karloff as Dr. Blair, Richard Fisk as Richard Sales, Amanda Duff as Anne Blair, Anne Revere as Mrs. Walters, Ralph Penny as a character named Carl, Dorothy Adams as Mrs. Marcy, Walter Baldwin as Seth Marcy, Kenneth MacDonald as Sheriff Ed Willis, whoever that is, and Shirley Ward as Helen Blair. Apparently there's a third Blair. Oh, Helen. Yes, of course. I guess they show her in flashback, maybe. Yup. So I'm gonna have to track that one down and read that. Or watch that, rather. I rather enjoyed that story. It's a really good little steadily ratchets up the tension. And culminates in the grim realization that our boy Julian Blair has put together a machine that opens up a rent in space-time. Possibly a black hole. I have to check which Lensman novel has an actual black hole weapon, though. I don't remember. Lensman. It was certainly after Galactic Patrol. It might have been Grey Lensman. but it also could have been second stage Lensman. Because I read them all one right after the other, I kind of get some of the sequence of events confused, especially given that most of the books are composed largely of like kind of in a number of like plot arcs, which are kind of an artifact of when it was being published in segmented in pulp magazines at the time. Let's see. Actually, those would have been around the same time. If it was Gray Lensman, it would be like the same year. If it was second stage Lensman, it would have been shortly thereafter. Anyway, one of those has like actual black hole weapons in it. It's Lensman. I've harped at length about how mind-blowing Lensman as a series is in terms of its raw scale and scope, for its kind of space opera pulpy vibe that it has going on. Its views towards women and race maybe aren't so great, but actually race I can't remember being an issue. Its treatment of women, on the other hand, is definitely problematic, and that's an unfortunate artifact of the time period it's from. I've read worse in that regard, from far later published than that. Anyway, that was The Edge of Running Water. Hope people enjoyed. So, now to the grim truth. This Friday I won't be here, in all likelihood. I'm going to find out for sure in the next 48 hours. Which is useless to most people. Within the next 24 hours, I should say. I should know. And next week is definitely going to be a bust. I'm not going to be around next week. If I'm around the week after, it will be piecemeal. Fortunately, I have successfully concluded basically everything I had set forth to conclude by the end of the year. I would kind of like to read the last chunk of Volume 4 of the complete collected fiction of William Hope Hodgson, entitled The Nightland and Other Perilous Romances. We would be doing the Other Perilous Romances, some of which are rather entertaining, some of which are very, very film noir, like bordering on like film noir detective fiction. So some good stuff is in there, is what I'm saying. So I would like to get around to that, but I don't know when that will be. Week after next at the earliest. If it's before next year, it would be great. My schedule is probably going to be pretty weird for a while. So I'm probably going to fail to change that on the YouTube channel or the Twitch channel, but I will try and make that reflect on the Discord channel, as I'll like cancel out whatever I've got for Monday, Wednesday, Friday on those for like the next month or so until I have something more certain. There will be changes. I will try and tell people as soon as I'm able to make those determinations and know. And we'll go from there. I will keep doing this. I will find a friggin' way. It's just I've got a lot going on. And I really, really wish it was like vacation stuff. I really wish it was, it's just family for the holidays. No, this is going to prove to be a longer term problem, unfortunately. If I'm lucky, I'll be able to shift my schedule to like Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I'm not holding my breath. We will see. So some changes are inbound. The format will not be quite the same, but we will try to keep it going. I may have to do it more infrequently. I do not want it to be catch as catch can. I want it to have a consistent, regular schedule because that keeps me sane. It gives me something to look forward to throughout the week. I enjoy doing these. I enjoy doing these a lot. So it is something I plan on doing. And my highest priority is to get Endymion by Dan Simmons started. I've had enough people ask for that one, and of course I had planned on doing it anyway, and I figure a 1-year turnaround, a bit more than a year, I guess, because I started that, I think, in late November of last year. A 1-year turnaround or so isn't too bad, I guess, all things considered. Could be worse. Lets the heart grow fonder. Of course, this year in review. Let's see, what did we get through this year in review? We got through Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer, the newest novel in the Area X series, or Southern Reach series. We got through a trilogy and a half. 2 trilogies. We got through 2 trilogies and one quadrilogy and whatever. So we got through Destination Void. Oh man, that was this year, right? Not last year. Pretty sure that was this year. Let's see. We got through Destination Void. We got through the Jesus Incident. We got through the Lazarus Effect. We got through. The Ascension Factor. My brain completely blanked on the name of the final volume of that series. All those by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. And we got through the Three-Body Trilogy, or Remembrance of Earth's Past Trilogy by Cixin Liu, which encompasses the Three-Body Problem, the Dark Forest, and Death's End. If I have enough people clamoring for it, I'll do... what is it called? Ball Lightning. I will probably never do The Redemption of Time. I just didn't think it was that good. I do still have my copy. I may do it if I have nothing else going, but it is fan fiction and not necessarily in the best possible way. Fan fiction in the best possible way would include much of the Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff, which I've had a couple requests for. I've got, I know I have the Tale of IG-88 in one of my old streams. I was going to do more from those short story collections. I'll try and make that a priority. Probably will focus on mostly the era of fiction that was being published before the whole Yuzhan Vong thing starts. I'm not saying those were all bad, but, I don't know, man. Killing Chewie isn't a great look. Although, in his defense, it did require a moon dropping on his head to do him in. So I'll probably do some of the short story collections. I'll probably get around to some of the better individual novels and the trilogies. Namely, the Thrawn trilogy and the Jedi Academy trilogy are both pretty big standouts, in my opinion. Shadows of the Empire would certainly be on the table. I probably won't focus too hard on reading them in chronological order or in production, writing order, when they were made, publishing order. There we go. It'll just kind of be how I'm feeling. There is a degree of rough chronology, but it's most of the time not that big a deal. I do think I have to read the Thrawn trilogy before I do the Jedi Academy trilogy, and certainly before there's another Timothy Zahn duology or two that are in there that happen further down the timeline that kind of necessitate a couple books be read before then, but I'm not really going to focus too hard on that. They do a good job of compartmentalizing, making the odd nod here and there, but not being too crazy. There was one recent one made in the wake of the most recent movie trilogy that was actually fairly worthwhile, but I can't remember the name of it. It focuses on Princess Leia and the political situation a couple years out from Return of the Jedi. kind of the rise of the First Order. I want to say it had like Blood Ties or First Blood or something like that, but I can't remember the title right now. I have to dig through my collection to find it. That one was actually pretty good. Of the recent stuff that I've read, that one was a pretty stellar standout. Maybe hits a bit too close to home to those of us living in a world with a United States in it. Those of you who are not living in that world, congratulations, you are in the better timeline. What are you doing here? Go back to your better timeline. Thank you. Things aren't going well in this country at the moment. it's not great. It's just not great. What a way to end the year. What a way to end the year. So yeah, this is very likely the last stream I'm going to be able to do this year, but I will try and keep people informed with at least 24 hours notice of when I'll have another one going. But unfortunately, I can only realistically do that via the Discord because I don't have a social media presence in the traditional sense. So, there. With that, I'm going to run. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other, and I will see you when next I see you. Until later, goodbye.